Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this week at Uncorked PA. And thanks so much for being patient. We did have a few technical difficulties earlier. So, for first time listeners, my name is Missy Wilson. I'm the second generation winery owner at Cedar Ridge Vineyards, and I've been immersed in the Pennsylvania wine industry for almost 20 years now. I've spent some time outside in the vineyards and time downstairs in the cellar, and I've currently been working in the tasting room and more of a day to day operations. So I'm excited to take you throughout the whole entire state of Pennsylvania, introduce you to grape growers, winemakers, and proponents of the wine industry. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button to make sure you see each new episode as it comes out. This week, I'm excited to touch on a topic that many of you may or may not know about. You can name the grapes: Chambourcin, Céval, Vidal Blanc, Vignoles. But do you know how they're different from Merlot, Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris? We're talking about hybrids this week. And I'm happy to have with us today Dr. Cain Hickey from Penn State University. And Kane is actually the viticulture extension agent throughout the state and will be educating us on hybrid grapes. And we're also happy to have with us Greg Winslow from Winslow Winery. They're a small winery located in Perryopolis that grows a variety of grapes that are both hybrid and vinifera. So don't forget to join us at PennsylvaniaWine.com for some additional information about the wineries in your area, additional wineries in the Southwestern Region of Pennsylvania, hybrids, and so much more. So it's a great way to start planning your getaway for either next week, next month, or over the summer. So first, we're happy to have with us on Greg Winslow of Winslow Winery. He has a vineyard that he's been growing for quite some time now that carries both hybrid and vinifera grapes. So thanks so much for joining us on the program today, Greg.
Hello.
So, Greg, first of all, for people not quite as familiar with the state of Pennsylvania, you are located in Perryopolis. Can you give us an idea of where that's located with some bigger cities or landmarks that people might be more familiar with?
Sure. We're in the southwest corner of the state in Fayette County, and we're about halfway in between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Morgantown, West Virginia, on right off of Route 51. Those would definitely be the two largest cities nearest to us.
Perfect. So, as I had mentioned, you've been growing grapes for quite some time now. It's actually a landmark year for your vineyard. You started planting grapes back in 2012. What made you decide to actually plant your vineyard instead of just strictly buying grapes from other local areas or out of state?
Well, I think it was important for us as a winery to have our own vineyard because I think it helps to establish an identity for your winery and for your area as well. Um, I think that's important because obviously the state of Pennsylvania has many different climatic regions as well as soil conditions, terroir, so to speak. But I think that's important and necessary. Not necessary, but I think it's important to give your winery identity.
So we were talking earlier, and you have some familiar grapes in your vineyards as well as some lesser known grapes. We're going to be talking about hybrids today. So can you tell us a little bit about the hybrids that you have in your vineyard?
Yeah, we have some of the more familiar hybrids that are grown throughout the state. Chambourcin for a red, Vidal Blanc as a white, Treminette as well, and we also have Chardonnay. We have a couple others that we experimented with. Aramello, which is a Cornell hybrid. We have a little bit of that, as well as some Narey and Chancellor. Uh, and we've gotten good results with them. Some are easier to work with than others, for sure. But when we were starting out, we weren't really sure what was going to do well on our site, so we planted a variety of the hybrids as well as some of the vinifera.
So, can you tell us how? So, for some of the lesser known, a lot of people are familiar with a Chambourcin and a Vidal Blanc. You had mentioned that you grow some Chardonnay. What exactly is that kind of grape? Is it white or red, and what are its characteristics?
Sure, I should have describe that more
That's
accurately.
okay.
No, Chardonnay is a white grape that's a cross between Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, and it makes some nice, large, loose clusters, bunches that do well for the humid and growing environment that we encounter in the Mid-Atlantic. Um, I have a feeling that I think it's more of a taste profile that's more similar to Chardonnay than Sauvignon. And with that, it does well with working in a variety of different styles versus being in stainless, or um, it also responds well to being oaked. And you can also use it for using as a base for making a sparkling wine, because it as the sugar increases throughout the year with that varietal, it holds its acidity pretty well, and which is necessary for making a good sparkling.
Oh, that's great. So you also a little bit of fun. You're growing vinifera in addition to hybrids, and you have some non-traditional vinifera planted in your vineyard. So ones that aren't quite typical for both Pennsylvania and the Southwest region of the state. What are some of the fun ones that you're actually growing and producing right now that people may not be as familiar with?
Well, we have, I guess, the mainstays like Cabernet Franc and Riesling, but we also tried to experiment with some other varietals that we were warned against planting and said that wouldn't do well, and we tried them anyways. One of the whites that we're growing uh, or reds that we're growing is called Pinotage, which is a mainly known South African varietal. It's a cross of Sisalt and Pinot Noir, I believe, and it has responded very well for our site, and we've gotten some nice fruit out of it, and it's different, and it's uh, I think a really nice different alternative to some of the other more common vinifera in this area. Uh, we'll see how long it does in the long haul, but again, it's been easy to work with, and that's another benefit for it. But
So
that
so it's a little bit of a heavier grape, right?
it is. It's definitely a medium body, uh, and I wouldn't say it's a heavy red, but I'd say it's definitely heavier than a Pinot Noir by far. Um, that's grown in the Mid Atlantic. But it's so far it's worked out well. Um,
Well, that's great. So in addition to making a traditional still wine, you also, we had talked about it, you started making some port. Can you tell us a little bit about that fun project?
sure, that's actually with one of the hybrids that we have planted. We have a great hybrid that's very cold climate vinifera or a hybrid called Marquette. And again, we planted this originally not knowing if it would work well or not. And uh, the our problem with the port or with the Marquette is that it goes through bud break very early compared to all the other varietals that we have. And it is because of that, it's very susceptible to getting hit with a spring frost. But when we do get through spring without having a frost issue, um, it does make a very concentrated, rich red wine and with very high sugars. So this past year, I think it came in over or around 27 bricks. We decided to make it into a port. So we purchased some brandy from a Pennsylvania distillery, and we have it working in the barrel right now. So hopefully,
That's
good things
great
to
that
come.
you decided to go work with a Pennsylvania distillery instead of, I know a lot of people when they bring in to make the port, they bring in from out of state. So that's a great collaboration, working all within the state for that.
Yeah.
So, if people are interested in visiting your tasting room and checking out your wines that you currently have on your tasting list, what are your tasting room hours like?
Well, Our normal hours are Fridays 3 to 7, Saturdays 12 to 6, and Sundays 12 to 5. But the rest of the week we could be reached by appointment. So if you're passing through on a Tuesday or whatever, if you give us a little bit of heads up, we could usually accommodate you.
Wonderful. So, what's the best way for them to actually get directions out to see you, check out some events they have, get in touch with you, and see your full wine list?
You could access our website, winslowwinery.com, or we're on Facebook as well. And we do our best to keep our tasting list up to date as much best as we can, and it is current. Those would be the easiest ways to get in touch with us.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Greg, and giving us a little bit more information about some of the fun grapes that you have currently growing inside of your vineyard itself. So make sure you grab some additional information about Winslow Winery on their website, which is winslowwinery.com, and feel free to stop in and do tasting of some of their unique varietals.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, next up, we have our guest, Dr. Cain Hickey, and he's actually the viticulture extension agent for Pennsylvania, and he does his research through Penn State University. He's a Penn State grad, and he finished his education up at Virginia Tech. So thanks so much for joining us today, Cain.
Thanks for having me, Missy.
Yeah,
glad to be here.
Exactly. I'm glad to bring a little bit more information and expertise into the podcast for people today. So first of all, can you tell us when you discovered your love of vines and what made you think of going down this route as your career path?
Sure. Well, I went to high school in the northwest part of the state, right along the lake. And so most that are in tune with the state's grape production know that there's lots of grapes grown up there. So much so that my high school mascot was called the Grape Pickers.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So it was like a destined thing. When I went to undergrad at Penn State, I went to undergrad in horticulture. And with horticulture, you can go into many different directions. You could do landscaping type things, aesthetic type things. You could do vegetables, Christmas trees. There's just so many options. And the natural fit for me was to go the route of grapes. So that was how I got interested in it. And growing up where I did, I had the opportunity to work at local wineries, working in the tasting room, work in the vineyard. Actually, Penn State has a research and extension center in my hometown. And so in the summers home from my undergrad at Penn State, I would go home and work at that grape research lab. And so having the experience in grape research and grape industry made me realize that I think I liked education and research. So then I went on to pursue my master's and PhD in viticulture.
Oh, that's great. That's actually really interesting. Just being surrounded by all the vines and the grapes, it really, you immersed yourself into it and you found a love of it, which is great. Well, this week we're talking about the Southwest region, and we talked to Greg at Winslow Winery. And when doing some research on this, I found that a lot of the wineries grow and produce hybrid grapes in that region. So when you're in the wine industry, you know the difference between a native grape and a hybrid grape and vinifera. However, I feel like a lot of consumers, they know the names of all these different types of grapes, but they don't actually know the history or the difference between the different types. So could you tell us a little bit more about hybrid grapes, why they were developed and why they make sense in certain growing situations?
Sure. Why exactly they were developed, I couldn't tell you accurately. What I have to believe is that breeding and mixing of genetics make cultivation of a fruit possible. So hybrids, the fundamental is that you can take genetics of maybe something with certain qualities, and then some genetics from another plant with certain qualities. So in the case of hybrids, maybe it's cold tolerance, or maybe it's disease tolerance. And then if you breed them with something like Greg just mentioned, to make Chardonnay, it's Sauvignon Blanc, which is a hybrid grape, has hybrid genetics, might be more cold tolerant, more productive, perhaps more disease tolerant. And then you blend that or cross it with Chardonnay that has wine quality attributes that folks really have grown to like, and you combine them. If the geneticist and breeders doing their job, they choose the selections that result in a good mix of both of those. So it produces good wine quality, but it also has properties that allow it to be cultivated in a more maybe sustainable fashion.
So, some hybrid grapes were actually developed to withstand the pressures of phylloxera, which, if some people don't know, it's the wonderful little microorganisms that we have growing in our ground that oh my gosh, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, almost devastated Europe's grape growing region by bringing them back because the vinifera grapes, or your French grapes, which people most know of, weren't intolerant to those. So a lot of hybrid grapes were also developed to withstand that pressure of the microorganisms, so they wouldn't die off. So how are vinifera grapes, such as like Merlot and Riesling and Chardonnay, how can we keep growing them if we know that there's this microorganism that kills them?
Yeah, it's through rootstocks. So when you grow a vine, there's a scion, which is the top part, which is the part above ground, and then there's the rootstock. And the rootstock, over time we learned that it was the soil dwelling phylloxera that did not allow the vinifera grapes to grow in soils infested with phylloxera. So once we found that out, then we realized that grafting, say, a Chardonnay or a Merlot or a Pinot Noir or Riesling onto a tolerant rootstock, a rootstock that was tolerant of phylloxera, allowed us to cultivate wines that, or cultivate vines that previously couldn't be grown in phylloxera infested soils.
Yeah, which unfortunately that's mostly everywhere, right? There's only a few places left now that don't have that.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I couldn't say with any precision or accuracy, but for example, some of Washington State has been rootstock free, but even they're finding, unfortunately, some phylloxera infestation in some areas. So yeah, there's few areas left probably.
So with the use of rootstocks now available to make vinifera growing possible, so your typical French European style grapes, what are the advantages of actually growing the hybrids over the traditional vinifera grapes? And are there any potential drawbacks for the hybrid grapes as well?
Mm-hmm. So vinifera, again, for those tuning in that don't know what vinifera is, we're talking about Merlot, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Riesling, Cabernet, all the wines that have come to be known as a household names for wine drinkers. I'll tell you the disadvantages. Even though you can keep them alive now through grafting onto a rootstock, that doesn't necessarily mean they're always a good fit, because we cultivate vines here in Pennsylvania in many regions on the East Coast that are humid. And when it's humid and cold and wet, a lot of times that results in issues for growing those cultivars, like fruit rots, poor maturity, and things like this. And so that requires chemical sprays to manage them, to keep them alive and healthy. So because you want to make wine with clean fruit. And that's totally possible. We have spray programs that allow that possible. So we can cultivate Merlot and Pinot Noir and Riesling and so on and so forth. But so some of the advantages of hybrids are greater tolerance to cold, or greater tolerance to disease, just greater tolerance to the abiotic, non-living and biotic living pests that make it sometimes challenging to grow some of the vinifera cultivars. So that's why hybrid cultivars make sense, because site selection is so important. And if you have a site that might be less than optimal in terms of a textbook perfect site to plant a vineyard on, a good place to start would be hybrids if you have question if it's going to be a good site or not. Like, we know some sites are just, this is a great site, it has high relative elevation, it has good slope, Water's going to drain away, cold air is going to drain away. But if there's a question about, will this cultivar work here, a lot of times I give growers a rating. I would say these cultivars are low risk, these cultivars are medium risk, and these cultivars are high risk. And almost all the time in the low risk category, it's hybrids, just because they're so resilient to our climate and just forgiving of production mistakes. Maybe you missed a spray. Maybe it's colder or wetter on your site than you thought. Hybrids can be a little bit more forgiving.
Yeah, and that's what I say to people all the time with like Pennsylvania. Everyone thinks of California as the growing region, and I always say it's great to grow in California. They don't have to worry about water. They don't have to worry about freezes. They have a little bit of an easier deal of growing the grapes. They don't have as much of the issues with the mildews and the rots and all the fun joys of the humidity of the East Coast that we do.
Yeah, and you said they don't have to worry about water. They do, well, just in an opposite way. In an opposite way. And so this is not to say Pennsylvania is a great place to grow grapes. Every growing region has plenty of challenges when you're growing grapes. If you plant grapes, there will be plenty of challenges, no matter where. But yeah, as you said, and again, we have spray programs. There's chemistries that are developed so that we can grow all those vinifera cultivars with success now, and many growers do. It's just hybrids are, good because they're just, like I said, they're forgiving of some of the, maybe a less than ideal site or maybe a spraying mistake or miss. You asked about Missy, you asked about potential drawbacks. This really isn't my forte because I'm more, I focus on growing and the vineyard aspects, but kind of like Greg was alluding to earlier, if you talk to somebody about Sauvignon Blanc or Vidal Blanc or Chambourcin, they're less apt to know about what that is or even hear of it. And so just from a consumer standpoint, the name recognition factor of vinifera, Merlot, Cab, Cabernet, and things like that is helps sell those products. So I would say, and this is just my hunch, that if you sell through your tasting room, that's your opportunity to educate folks about what this wine is. I've never heard of it. But if you're distributing, I don't know, but my hunch is that if someone saw a Chardonnay and a Sauvignon Blanc side by side, they would opt for the Chardonnay just for the sake of name recognition. So one potential drawback might be the marketing and consumer name recognition of them.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to go and visit your local tasting rooms, because it gives you that opportunity to really try something that you might not have heard of before, and you don't have to commit to a whole bottle, and you can see whether or not you like that varietal, whether it's a hybrid or, even if it's a vinifera, like Greg was saying, he grows Pinotage, which not as many people know about that as a vinifera as well. So tasting rooms are a great asset. And there are so many of them within the state. So you're actually the viticulture extension agent for Pennsylvania. So can you tell us a little bit about what your role is, and how do people reach out for you if they would like your help?
Sure. So my job, plain and simple, my job is to serve the technical needs of grape growing in Pennsylvania. So basically, for Pennsylvania growers, commercial growers, I'm a free consultant of sorts, right? So I hold workshops, I hold webinars, I answer lots of texts and emails and phone calls, and I go out to vineyards and visit them and talk about management strategies. Later this week, I'm going to talk to some growers in a roundtable format. The day after that, I'm going to look at a site to talk about, on this property, I own this property, where would be the best place to plant certain cultivars. And so really, my job is just to work with growers to, what I say, grow the best grapes possible, given the limitations of their site, because every site has its limitations. And so you can only do as good as your site will let you do. And so that's where cultivar selection and pruning choice and training choice and all that comes into play. And that's my job, is to help people with that.
So if someone's interested in starting their own vineyard and they want to do it not just, 4 or 5 plants, but they want to go all out, they can reach out to you to see what you think would be a great option for the types of vines to put in their vineyard.
That's right.
And how would they be able to reach out to you for something like
Yes.
that?
They could type my name into Google and type that. That would probably do it. You can find my contact information on Penn State's website, but my email address is viticulture at psu.edu. So emailing me there would be fine. And again, my contact information is on Penn State's website.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Kane. I think it's really great to know that there's a resource out there for people who are looking to get into maybe the growing side of the business instead of the winemaking side of the business, because definitely both aspects are just as important for making wine. So we need great growers as well. So you provided a lot of information about the main ingredient of wine today, which is grapes. So we really appreciate that. Thanks for joining us, Kane.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation, Missy.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining us all today, guys, as we visited the southwestern portion of Pennsylvania. There's a wide range of wineries to visit in this region. So if you're traveling across the state on the Turnpike, there's several in close vicinity of I-76. If you're planning on visiting Pittsburgh, there's over a dozen wineries in the near vicinity of Pittsburgh, including several urban wineries. So don't forget to visit PennsylvaniaWine.com to create your itinerary, whether it's in the Southwest Pennsylvania or any other portion of the state. The great part, as I mentioned about visiting tasting rooms, is you actually have the opportunity to taste grapes or blends that you might not have heard before. I always suggest when you go tasting, try some of your favorites, but definitely pick something unexpected as well. You might find yourself pleasantly surprised. Pennsylvania wines range from vinifera to hybrids to native grapes, and they're dry to sweet and everywhere in between. So you'll definitely be able to find a wine that you love while visiting Pennsylvania. So next time, join us as we talk about International Riesling Day that's celebrated on March 13th. So we're going to actually talk about the grape, the various styles of wines, and great ways to enjoy it. If you have any suggestions for topics that you would like us to discuss, feel free to let us know in the comments section as well. And don't forget that we stream live on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month, starting at noon on both Facebook and YouTube. And you can also listen to Uncork PA on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite place to stream your podcast. If you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to the station so you know when new episodes are posted. And thank you so much to the Pennsylvania Wine Association for supporting this program with grant money from the PLCB. We look forward to sharing more hidden gems of the Pennsylvania wine world with you next time. Have a great day.